Imagine surviving the plague only to realize the nightmare wasn't over. Staying alive in medieval Europe didn't mean relief. It meant grief, fear, and a world permanently changed. Streets were silent, families were gone, and the people who remained often treated survivors with suspicion, not relief. Your body was weak, work was scarce, and the memory of death followed you everywhere. Living through the plague wasn't a victory, it was learning how to exist after everything familiar had collapsed. If you enjoy these short human stories from history, don't forget to like and subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow. And tell me where you're listening from. It's still surreal seeing people from all over the world sharing the same story. All right, tonight, we're stepping into why it truly sucked to be a medieval plague survivor, the part of the story most people never talk about.
You've just woken up in Europe in the year 1347. The morning air is crisp as you open your eyes, stretching on your straw-filled mattress. You're not in a private bedroom like you might be used to. You're in a one-room cottage with the rest of your family. The walls are made of wattle and daub. You know, a wooden frame filled with a mixture of mud, clay and straw. It's actually quite good at keeping out the cold, though the thatched roof overhead sometimes leaks when heavy rains come. As you rise, your nose fills with familiar scents, the smoky aroma from last night's hearth fire, the earthy smell of the dirt floor beneath your feet and the distinct tang of unwashed bodies. Bathing isn't something people do very often in medieval times. The good news is nobody really notices because everyone smells pretty much the same. Your belly grumbles with hunger. If you're lucky, there might be some leftover bread from yesterday, though it's likely rock hard by now. You'd soften it in some ale. Yes, even children drink weak ale in these times. It's often safer than water, which can make you terribly sick if it's drawn from a contaminated source. Outside your small cottage, the village is already stirring to life. You hear the distant lowing of cattle, the clucking of chickens, and the calls of your neighbours as they begin their daily work. Most people here are peasants who work the land either as free tenants who pay rent to the local lord, or as serfs who are bound to the land and must provide labour services. Life has a certain predictable rhythm in your medieval village. The days are measured by the rising and setting of the sun, the weeks by the toll of the church bells calling you to Mass, and the years by the turning of the seasons and the cycle of planting and harvesting. It's a hard life, certainly, but it's the only one you've ever known. What you don't know, what nobody in Europe knows yet, is that everything is about to change. A shadow is creeping across the continent, one that will transform society in ways no war or famine ever has. The first whispers reach your village on the lips of a travelling merchant. He brings exotic goods from far-off places, silks from the east, spices from distant lands. But this time he brings something else. Stories. Terrifying stories of a sickness that has been devastating cities along the trade routes. People are dying by the thousands, he says, struck down by a mysterious illness that brings fever, painful swellings, and almost certain death. Some villagers cross themselves and mutter prayers. Others dismiss the tales as exaggerations. After all, alarming rumours often spread faster than truth. The merchant moves on, and for a while, life continues as normal. But the rumours persist, growing more frequent and more frightening with each passing month. By autumn, the whispers have become shouts of alarm. The sickness has reached the Mediterranean ports of Europe, Messina, Marseille, Venice. They say ships have arrived in harbours filled with nothing but corpses, the sailors having died during their journey. God save us all, your mother murmurs when she hears the news, making the sign of the cross. In your village, people begin to prepare as best they can, though no one really knows what they're preparing for. Some store extra food. Others spend more time in church praying for divine protection. The local healer gathers herbs and remedies, though whether any will be effective against this unknown affliction no one can say. The first cases reach your region in the cold months of winter. A neighbouring village just half a day's walk away reports several sudden deaths. The victims suffered high fevers, complained of terrible thirst, and developed strange black swellings in their armpits and groins. Few survived more than 3 days after showing symptoms. Your village elders meet to discuss what should be done. Some suggest closing the village to outsiders, while others argue that trade and communication must continue. In the end, life goes on, though with a new undercurrent of fear. Then, one crisp morning, a young man who works at the mill fails to appear for his duties. When someone goes to check on him, they find him burning with fever, his body covered in sweat, his neck swollen with a painful boo the size of a hen's egg. The plague has arrived in your village. What follows is a time of horror unlike anything you could have imagined. The sickness spreads with frightening speed. One day a person is healthy, the next day feverish, and by the third day, more often than not, they are dead. The black buboes that give the disease its name, the Black Death, are painful beyond description. Some victims cough blood, suggesting the disease has reached their lungs, and these unfortunates rarely last more than a day or two. It's a punishment from God, some say, flogging themselves in penance for their sins. It's bad air, others claim, carrying posies of flowers to ward off the foul miasma they believe causes the disease. It's the Jews poisoning the wells, a few darkly mutter, though your village has no Jewish residents, and such accusations make little sense. The truth, which no one in the 14th century could possibly know, is that the Black Death is caused by a bacterium called Yinia pestis. This tiny organism travels in the gut of fleas, which in turn hitch rides on the backs of rats. These rats stowaways on ships and constant companions in medieval towns and villages have unwittingly transported death across continents. When an infected flea bites a human, it regurgitates the bacteria into the wound. The bacteria then multiply rapidly, often causing swelling in the lymph nodes, those painful buboes. If the bacteria reach the lungs, they cause pneumonic plague, which can spread directly from person to person through coughing and breathing. But you don't know any of this. All you know is that people are dying and no one seems able to stop it. Your village, like thousands of others across Europe, is transformed by the plague. The church bells, which once rang to mark the hours and call people to prayer, now toll constantly for the dead. Eventually there are too many deaths to announce, and the bells fall silent. The dead are buried quickly with little ceremony. Gone are the elaborate funeral rites that once marked a person's passing from this world to the next. Now bodies are collected on carts and taken to mass graves. Some families devastated by multiple deaths have no one left to bury their dead, and bodies might lie in homes for days until neighbours or parish officials remove them. Fear changes how people behave toward one another. Those who have healthy family members might bar their doors to visitors, while those with sick relatives often find themselves avoided. Some flee to the countryside, hoping distance will protect them from the disease. Others turn to religion with renewed fervour, processing through streets while flagellation themselves to appease what they believe is divine wrath. The priests who should be a source of comfort are themselves dying in alarming numbers. Their duties require them to give last rites to the dying, exposing them constantly to the contagion. Many flee, abandoning their flocks in this time of greatest need. Those who stay often succumb to the disease themselves. Your family has so far been lucky. Though the plague rages around you, none of your immediate household has fallen ill. You've heard stories of entire families being wiped out in neighbouring villages, of children orphaned only to die themselves days later, of lovers separated by death just hours after pledging eternal devotion. But your luck cannot hold forever in a world where the Black Death kills 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. One morning your younger brother complains of feeling unwell. By midday he is burning with fever. By evening the telltale swelling appears at his neck, and you know what it means. Your mother tends to him day and night, bathing his fevered brow with cool cloths, trying to get him to drink small sips of water or weak ale. Your father speaks of taking him to the monastery where monks treat the sick. But everyone knows the monasteries are overwhelmed with many of the brothers themselves victims of the plague. For 3 days your brother's condition worsens. The boo grows larger, turning an angry red, then black. His breathing becomes laboured, and he cries out in pain and delirium. You take turns sitting with him, though fear makes you want to keep your distance. On the 4th day, something unexpected happens. While most plague victims worsen and die at this stage, your brother's fever breaks. He is weak, terribly weak, but alert. The boo remains, but it has softened somewhat, and over the next few days it ruptures and drains, a disgusting but hopeful sign. Against all odds, your brother is one of the few who will survive the Black Death. What you cannot know is why he survived when so many others died. Modern science would later discover that certain individuals carry a genetic mutation called Delta 32 that provides some protection against the plague bacterium. This mutation affects a protein called CCR5 on the surface of white blood cells, making it harder for the bacteria to enter and hijack immune cells. Your brother may well carry this mutation, as might others in your family. This genetic quirk, a random accident of nature, would give certain families and individuals a fighting chance against the deadliest pandemic in human history. And strangely enough, centuries later, scientists would discover that this same mutation also provides protection against another deadly disease, HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. The Black Death, in selecting for survivors with this genetic trait, would inadvertently help protect some of their descendants from a disease that wouldn't exist for another 600 years. But that's a story for another time. For now your family celebrates your brother's recovery as the miracle it seems to be. Not everyone is so fortunate. As weeks pass, the plague continues its deadly work. Your village, which once had perhaps 200 souls, is reduced to fewer than 100 fields, lie untended as those who would work them are either dead or too busy caring for the sick or burying the dead. The lord of the manor, who lives in a stone house on the hill overlooking the village, has lost his wife and 2 of his children. Even wealth and privilege offer no protection against the Black Death. Strangely, some people seem immune to the plague despite constant exposure. The village gravedigger, an unsavoury character who robs the dead before burying them, handles plague-riddled corpses daily, yet never shows any symptoms. A midwife who tends to the sick when she isn't delivering babies also remains healthy despite her dangerous work. Like your brother, they may carry genetic protection, though medieval people would attribute their survival to divine intervention, or perhaps suspicious dealings with dark forces. Food becomes scarce as the harvest is neglected and trade dwindles. The price of basic goods soars while anything seen as a possible remedy. Certain herbs, exotic treatments, religious relics becomes astronomically expensive, if available at all. As winter approaches, the plague begins to recede, not because of any human intervention, but due to the natural cycle of the disease. Fleas are less active in cold weather, and rats tend to stay closer to their nests. For a brief time there is hope that the worst has passed, but the Black Death is not finished. It retreats only to return with the warming weather of spring, finding new victims among those who survived the first wave. Over the next 4 years, from 1347 to 1351, successive waves of plague will sweep across Europe, killing somewhere between 75 and 200 million people, perhaps half of Europe's entire population. The world that emerges from this catastrophe will be fundamentally changed. The massive population decline will disrupt the feudal system, increase the value of labour and shift power dynamics between peasants and nobility. Religious authority will be questioned as people wonder why their prayers went unanswered and why so many priests abandoned their duties. Medical knowledge based largely on ancient texts and superstition will be challenged by the plague's defiance of traditional treatments. For those who survive, people like your brother, the grave digger, the midwife, life will never return to what it was before. They are the fortunate ones, though they carry the burden of survival in a world of loss. They will rebuild societies, renegotiate their relationships with authority, and gradually construct a post-plague world that, for better or worse, sets Europe on a path toward modernity. But that is a story for tomorrow night. For now, as you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself as one of those medieval survivors watching the first stars appear in the evening sky above your village. The plague has passed, at least for now. You have lived through humanity's darkest hour, and though you don't yet know it, you stand at the threshold of a new world born from the ashes of the old. The soft sound of your breathing mingles with the night sounds outside. A dog barking in the distance, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Despite everything, despite unimaginable loss and suffering, life continues. And in that simple fact lies perhaps the most important lesson of the Black Death. Humanity's remarkable capacity to endure, to adapt, and ultimately to carry on. The morning after your brother's miraculous recovery brings a strange mix of emotions. Relief washes over you certainly, but it's tinged with something unfamiliar. A sense of wondering why your family was spared when so many others weren't. This strange survivor's guilt, this feeling of unworthiness amid widespread suffering haunts many who live through catastrophes. Your brother is weak but alert, his eyes clear for the first time in days. The drained boo at his neck has left an ugly scar that will mark him for life, a permanent reminder of his brush with death. But a scar is infinitely preferable to a grave, and your family treats each day of his recovery as the gift it truly is. "Why did I live when so many died?" he asks one evening, his voice still raspy from illness. Your mother, lighting a rush candle as darkness falls, pauses before answering. "Yo, God's will," she says simply, though her tone suggests she's not entirely convinced. The truth, which no one in the 14th century could possibly comprehend, is far more complex. Throughout human history, infectious diseases have acted as powerful forces of natural selection. Those with genetic advantages against specific pathogens survive at higher rates, passing these protective traits to future generations. The Black Death is perhaps the most dramatic example of this process in human history. Deep in your brother's cells, and perhaps yours as well, lies a genetic mutation that alters a protein called CCR5 on the surface of white blood cells. This mutation, known as Delta 32, creates a shortened version of the protein that makes it harder for the plague bacterium to enter and hijack immune cells. Some people have one copy of this mutation, providing partial protection. A fortunate few have two copies, giving them substantial resistance to the disease. It's a genetic lottery, and your brother happens to hold a winning ticket. But the cost of this evolutionary advantage is measured in millions of lives, those without the protective mutation who succumb to the Black Death. As your brother regains his strength, venturing outside for the first time since his illness, you notice how dramatically the village has changed. Gardens once meticulously tended now grow wild. Houses stand empty, their owners dead or fled. The rhythmic sounds of daily work, the blacksmith's hammer, the weaver's loom, the miller's wheel are muted or absent entirely. Yet amid this desolation, signs of resilience emerge. A market day is organised, smaller than before, but vibrant with the energy of survivors determined to continue living. Farmers from outlying areas bring what produce they've managed to harvest. A travelling merchant, braver or more foolhardy than most, arrives with salt, spices, and news from distant places. The news is the same everywhere. Devastation followed by tentative recovery. No place has been spared, though some have suffered worse than others. Cities with their crowded conditions and poor sanitation have been particularly hard hit. Some small isolated villages high in the mountains or deep in forests have fared better, though few have escaped entirely. In your region, perhaps half the population has perished. In some places, the toll is even higher. The merchant speaks of ghost towns where not a soul remains alive, of monasteries where every monk lies dead in his cell, of noble families wiped out entirely, their grand estates left without heirs. But he also tells of places where life continues with surprising normality, of communities pulling together to care for orphans and widows, of unexpected kindnesses in a time of overwhelming hardship. One story in particular captures your attention. In a village much like yours, a woman named Elizabeth lost her husband and 6 children to the plague within a single week. She dragged each of their bodies to a hillside behind their home and buried them herself, one by one. Yet somehow, despite this intimate contact with the disease, Elizabeth never became ill. Like your brother and the village gravedigger, she appeared to possess some natural immunity, that same genetic protection that modern science would one day identify. They say she's a witch, the merchant confides, lowering his voice though there's no one nearby to overhear. How else could she touch the dead and live? Some wanted to drown her in the pond, but most were just grateful to have someone willing to bury their dead. Such rumours are common in these desperate times. Those who survive against the odds, particularly if they're women living alone, or people with unusual habits or appearances, often find themselves suspected of dark dealings. Fear and superstition flourish alongside the plague, sometimes claiming victims of their own. Your father, who has been listening to the merchant's tales, shakes his head. No witchcraft in survival, he says firmly. Some are simply stronger against the sickness, like my son. He places a proud hand on your brother's shoulder. The merchant nods agreeably, always careful not to contradict a potential customer. True enough, in every village there are those the plague cannot touch, God's chosen, perhaps. As winter arrives, bringing with it bitter cold and early darkness, your village settles into a new routine. There are fewer mouths to feed, which means food stores will last longer than usual. A small mercy, but there are also fewer hands to chop wood, repair homes, care for livestock, and perform the 100 daily tasks necessary for survival in medieval times. This scarcity of labour creates subtle but significant shifts in the relationship between peasants and the nobility. Your father, a skilled carpenter, is suddenly in high demand. The lord of the manor, who once would have simply commanded his service, now finds himself negotiating, offering better terms for urgent repairs to the manor house. He offered me a silver penny for 3 days' work. Your father tells your mother one evening, his voice low with amazement, and a side of bacon. Such wages would have been unthinkable before the plague. But with half the craftsmen in the region dead, those who survive find their skills valued as never before. Similar changes ripple through all levels of society. Farm labourers, at once abundant and easily replaced, now command higher wages for their work. Household servants, especially those with experience running a large home, find themselves sought after by noble families whose staff have been decimated by disease. Women too find new opportunities in this reshuffled world. Widows who would once have remarried quickly now often choose to maintain their independence, running businesses left by dead husbands. Guild restrictions that once kept women from certain professions are informally relaxed out of necessity. A woman in a neighbouring village takes over her husband's blacksmith forge, scandalising traditionalists but providing an essential service no one else can offer. For serfs, peasants legally bound to the land they work, the plague creates unprecedented mobility. Many lords desperate to keep their fields productive offer freedom to serfs willing to stay and work. Others find they can simply leave, moving to towns or to other manors where conditions are better. With little fear of being forced back with so many dead, enforcement of such restrictions becomes increasingly difficult. Not all these changes happen immediately. Of course, the feudal system that has structured European society for centuries doesn't collapse overnight, but the seeds of transformation are planted in these early post-plague years, and they will grow in the decades to come. As for your family, you adjust to the new reality as best you can. Your brother regains his strength, though he tires more easily than before. Your father finds his carpentry skills in high demand, bringing home better pay than he's ever earned. Your mother takes in washing from the manor house, work that's now better compensated due to the shortage of willing hands. You yourself find opportunities that wouldn't have existed before. The parish priest, one of the few clergy who neither died nor fled during the worst of the plague, needs someone to help maintain church records. With a basic literacy, unusual for a peasant child, taught by your mother who once served in a noble household, you're suited for the task. Spring arrives, and with it comes both hope and fear. The warming weather brings new life, crops sprouting in fields, wildflowers dotting meadows, birds returning from their winter journeys. But it also brings the conditions that allow plague to spread once more. Sure enough, by early summer, new cases appear. This second wave is less devastating than the first. There are fewer people to infect, and many of those who remain may carry some genetic resistance. Still, each new death reopens barely healed communal wounds. One afternoon, while helping the priest update the parish death register, a grimly long document, you ask a question that has been troubling you. Father, why did God send the plague? The priest, an older man with a face mapped by lines of exhaustion, considers before answering. Some say it's punishment for sin, he says finally. Others believe it's a test of faith. The Pope himself has called for prayer and penance to end the scourge. He dips his quill in ink, adding another name to the register. But I've seen the most pious die in agony, while notorious sinners live unscathed. I've prayed by the bedsides of innocent children as the plague took them. He sighed heavily. Perhaps it's not for us to understand God's plan. This crisis of faith is repeated in communities across Europe. The plague defies medieval religious understanding. If it's divine punishment, why does it strike the virtuous and sinful alike? If prayer and penance are the cure, why do devoted monasteries suffer some of the highest death rates? The authority of the Church, once nearly absolute in matters of earthly misfortune, begins to show cracks that will widen in the centuries to come. Medical knowledge faces similar challenges. Physicians trained in the most prestigious universities prove no more effective at treating plague than village healers. Their elaborate theories based on bodily humours and astronomical alignments fail to explain why some recover while others die, why some communities suffer worse than others. Some doctors bravely attend the sick, often sacrificing their own lives in the process. Others flee at the first sign of outbreak, prioritising self-preservation over professional duty. Those who stay commonly wear distinctive protective clothing, long robes covered in wax, gloves and a mask shaped like a bird's beak, filled with herbs and spices believed to purify the air. This strange outfit, which would become iconic in later plague outbreaks, does little to protect them from the actual source of infection. In the absence of effective official treatment, communities develop their own responses to the plague. Some are based on superstition, carrying talismans, reciting charms, avoiding black cats or people with red hair. Others have surprising practical value, isolating the sick, burning the belongings of plague victims, maintaining cleanliness. None offer complete protection, but these community-developed practices sometimes help limit the spread. Your village adopts several such measures. Houses where plague has struck are marked with white crosses on the doors. Visitors from outside the village must wait 3 days in a designated hut before entering to ensure they show no signs of disease. The dead are buried quickly. With minimal ceremony, their possessions burned. These precautions help, but they can't stop the plague entirely. By midsummer, your village has lost a dozen more people to the second wave. A serious blow to a community already diminished by the first outbreak. One victim is the Lord of the Manor himself, a man in his 50s who had survived the first wave only to succumb to the second. His death creates ripples of consequence throughout the local social hierarchy. His son, barely 20 and newly returned from university in Paris, inherits the manor and its lands. This new lord, young and influenced by novel ideas from his education, takes a different approach to managing the estate than his father did. Recognizing the scarcity of labour and the changing dynamics of power, he offers better terms to tenant farmers. Serfs who agree to stay and work the manors are granted their freedom and more favourable rents. Those with specialised skills, your father among them, receive privileges once reserved for those of higher social rank. Not all nobles adapt so readily to the new reality. In neighbouring manors, some lords attempt to enforce old restrictions more harshly, forbidding peasants from leaving, punishing those who demand higher wages, using force to maintain the old order. These efforts rarely succeed for long. Peasants simply leave, seeking better conditions elsewhere. With land abundant and workers scarce, they find no shortage of opportunities. The plague's second wave finally recedes with the coming of autumn. Your village has survived, diminished but intact. Of the original 200 residents, perhaps 90 remain. Fields have been consolidated with the most fertile land prioritized for cultivation. Houses stand empty, their timbers and thatch gradually scavenged for other uses. Yet life has a remarkable capacity to normalize even after catastrophe. Children play in the village square again. The rhythms of agricultural life, planting, tending, harvesting, continue, adapted to the reduced workforce. Weddings take place, babies are born, commerce resumes. One clear autumn day. A surprising visitor arrives in the village, a mason who had left years before to seek work in the cities. He had built a good life in Florence, he tells anyone who will listen, working on the magnificent cathedral there. But when the plague struck, it devastated the city worse than any rural area. I watched half of Florence die, he says, his eyes haunted by memories. The rich fled to their country estates, but the poor had nowhere to go. Bodies piled in the streets faster than they could be buried. I survived. God knows how. After the worst passed, work on the cathedral halted. With so many dead, priorities shifted to essential rebuilding. The mason, finding himself without steady employment, decided to return to his birthplace. His story is not unique. Throughout Europe, the plague causes a temporary reversal of the centuries-long trend of urbanization. Cities with their crowded conditions are perfect breeding grounds for disease. Many who survive flee to the countryside, seeking safety in open spaces and smaller communities. This urban exodus brings unexpected benefits to rural villages like yours. People return with new skills, new ideas, and new perspectives gained from their time in cities. They bring tales of different ways of living, of technological innovations, of political systems unlike the feudal structure of rural areas. The mason, for instance, describes how Florence was governed not by a hereditary noble, but by elected officials from the merchant class. He speaks of mechanical clocks that divide the day into precise hours, of water management systems that bring clean water into the city, of banking practices that allow trade across vast distances. These ideas find fertile ground in communities already questioning traditional authorities and practices. The plague has created cracks in the medieval worldview, and through these cracks, new possibilities emerge. For you and your family, life continues in this altered landscape. Your brother, fully recovered, though scarred by his encounter with plague, apprentices to the returned mason, learning the skilled craft that will provide him a secure future in a world where such skills are increasingly valued. Your father's carpentry keeps the family comfortable, his services now commanding wages that would have been unimaginable before the plague. Your mother no longer takes in washing, instead focusing on an herb garden that produces remedies in high demand since the plague depleted the ranks of traditional healers. You continue assisting the priest with parish records, your literacy and quick mind making you valuable in a community where such skills are rare. In the old world, your peasant birth would have limited your prospects regardless of your abilities. In the post-plague world, with its fluid social boundaries and desperate need for talent wherever it can be found, opportunities expand before you. One evening, as your family sits around the hearth, sharing a meal more abundant than any you might have hoped for in the pre-plague years, your father voices what many are thinking. "It's a terrible thing to say," he begins hesitantly. "But for those of us who survived, life is better now than before." Your mother nods slowly. "More food, better pay, more freedom," she agrees. "Built on countless graves." It's the uncomfortable paradox at the heart of the post-plague world. For those fortunate enough to survive, whether through genetic luck like your brother, circumstantial fortune, or simple isolation from infection sources, the new world offers advantages the old one never could. The massive reduction in population creates opportunities for social advancement, economic improvement, and personal freedom that would have been unthinkable in the crowded, rigidly hierarchical pre-plague society. Yet these benefits come at an unimaginable cost. The lives of millions, the destruction of families, communities torn apart, knowledge and culture lost with those who carried it. No survivor can fully enjoy their improved circumstances without the shadow of this knowledge. As you drift towards sleep that night, you find yourself wondering about the future. The plague has retreated for now, but no one believes it's gone forever. It will return as it has before, bringing new waves of death. Yet humanity will survive, adapting to each outbreak, developing new responses, gradually building knowledge that will centuries later finally conquer this invisible enemy. What you cannot know is that you stand at a turning point in history. The world that will emerge from the ashes of the Black Death will be fundamentally different from what came before. The seeds of the Renaissance are being planted in these years of recovery. The rigid feudal system is beginning its long, slow decline. The unquestioned authority of traditional power structures, both secular and religious, has been shaken. And on a biological level, the plague has reshaped the human species itself, selecting for genetic traits that will influence health and disease resistance for generations to come. Your brother's survival, far from being merely personal good fortune, represents an evolutionary chapter in humanity's endless dance with the microscopic organisms that both sustain and threaten us. Tomorrow, as a new day dawn on your changed world, you'll continue the work of rebuilding, of adapting, of finding a way forward. That's what plague survivors have always done throughout history. They carry on bearing the weight of memory while facing toward the future. And in doing so, they reshape the world in ways that will echo through centuries to come. The story of survival we've been following through the Black Death of the 14th century is far from the only tale of courage and genetic luck in humanity's long dance with plague. As the soft darkness of sleep envelops you, let's journey forward through time to another village, another outbreak, and another remarkable story of sacrifice and survival. 300 years have passed since the first devastating waves of the Black Death swept through Europe. It's now the summer of 1665 and we find ourselves in Eyam, a small village nestled in the picturesque hills of Derbyshire, England. Eyam, you know, is pronounced just like Im. It's a peaceful community of about 800 souls, mostly farmers and lead miners who work the rich veins running beneath the limestone landscape. Life here follows the familiar rhythms of rural England,